All right, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, right, to get through this thing called life. And I'm Tiffany, this is Addie. We're here to talk about Ancestral Tarot. You found us on the Wise Skies podcast. So we're going to talk about what Ancestral Tarot is a little bit. And I want to introduce you to some of Addie's work. I just listened to her class. I got the sneak peek, but she has offered an amazing workshop that I'm just still crying about. Like I'm so touched because it's such beautiful work. And I want to tell you all about it, but it's for our members only. And so if you're not a member yet, it's $22 a month, and you get not only Addie's amazing class, but you also get an Akashic record reading about relationships. There's a human design support call and Astro Tarot horoscope reading. So I hope you join this month. But if it's not the right month for you, no problem. Today we're going to visit about what Ancestral Tarot healing looks like. Addie, welcome. Addie's company is Don't Fear the Death Card. Addie and I know each other from food writing, from journalism. And so we have a friendship of being in Austin here together, that we have lots of Venn diagrams, but we came together a couple months ago before my birthday, which is November 7th. And I had a reading with her that blew me away. And it sent me on this journey to Galveston, where my ancestors came through from Russia. And I don't want to say it's like hard to woo me, but it kind of is, because I get wooed a lot, like I live in the synchronicity. But that trip, and I was kind of pissed that like I couldn't do my reading with Addie on my birthday. Like I was such a grumpy Scorpio about it. But thank God we did it early, because it gave me clues to the mystery of that trip that were just, it was just right time for me. And so if it's the right time for you, you're going to know it. Addie has written a lot about her own ancestral journey, and I want you to show them your ancestral tattoo, which is so badass, right? So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. And if you're listening to the podcast, sorry, maybe find us on YouTube later. But Addie, thank you so much for what
you are so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored and blessed that you see my work in the way that it is intended to be seen and felt. And I have so much respect for Wise Guys. Go get the membership, y'all, if you haven't already. There's nobody working harder, at least in the Texas market that I know of, than you, to bring together these healing modalities and make space for people who do things in different ways. And that's what I think I've really come to terms with my own tarot work, is that, I have so much reverence for teachers and practitioners who have been at it for so long. And I've only been at tarot for like 5 years, but the more I bring the ancestral stuff into it, I actually am beginning to think that tarot is just the portal for me to do the ancestry work. And that the ancestry work I've been working on since I was born. And I think what really, I could look back on my life and see some clues that led me to this were just how much I loved being a granddaughter.
Oh,
I loved being in my family, my extended family. It wasn't a perfect family of origin, or, there's a lot of family dysfunction that I've found a lot of healing from in my family tree, which we can talk more about how tarot and ancestry work can work specifically with that. But just in general, I think folks who might be called to this work are people who enjoy hearing stories from loved ones. When it's time for people to get together, you don't mind when the great aunties are telling you the same stories that they've heard all, again and again. You're the type of person who says, even in your imagination, Grandpa, show me your tools and what you made out in the tool shed again. And why is it that you plant this at this time? And why do you do things like this in the kitchen? And why in our family do we celebrate this holiday with this particular dish? And if you're the type of person that asks those types of questions, maybe even from a young age, this is the type of work that I think you're going to be interested in.
Yeah, right. Okay, so my dog and your dog are both,
I know, doing the same thing. I actually just posted something about how I find ancestral healing work in my dog work. So I do some side work with watching dogs and walking dogs, because our pets died a couple of years ago, well, during the pandemic. We lost both of our animals, and I'm still grieving those animals, but watching other people's dogs has really been a spiritual practice for me to connect with that. And I didn't connect it to ancestry until my mom, on the anniversary of my dad's death a couple of days ago, sent me a photo of our childhood dog sitting on his chest on a he's asleep on a canoe, and this dog is like on him. It's just the funniest thing, because I remember, like, my dad loved dogs. He always took dogs with us whenever we would go camping. The way he played with dogs was so freeing and so liberated, and he became a little boy when he played with dogs. So when I am now with an animal, I get to think about how my dad was with animals, and he only lived to be 65 years old, but I think about all the dogs that accompanied him on his journey while he was alive. And I think about how grateful I am that I have these dogs, even if it's for a short temporary period of time. So needless to say, ancestry work becomes part of every aspect of my life. From the way I cook, my hobbies, how I talk to my kids about grief and loss, and ultimately now my tarot practice.
Which I just love how you weave all that together. And in the class you give some really good tips about how to interact with your ancestors in a real practical, very like earthy, natural, organic kind of a way. So just like you did with the dog example.
Yeah, it can be small. I think when people think about ancestral healing, they think about their whole tree all at once,
Mhm.
or the constellation of well and chosen ancestors that are beyond the people you're blood related to. And it can be a lot. If you think about just how many Facebook friends you have, and then you think about in your ancestral tree, you don't have to go back very far for you to suddenly have 64 ancestors. And then you start bringing in cousins and aunts and uncles. I mean, it can just get really sprawling. But
Mhm.
I just really encourage people to take it slow, start with the ancestor that you're feeling most called to work with. And sometimes that is around a loss, or a birthday, death and life. I named my company Don't Fear the Death card because I have had several profound experiences with death in my life that then led to birth and rebirth. And because I started paying attention to those cycles pretty early on, I am pretty comfortable with them. I actually, nobody looks forward to losing a parent. Nobody, it still breaks my heart that I don't have any grandparents who are living, but it's also not surprising that that's when my ancestral relationships began in a more concerted way, because I was missing my loved ones so much.
Yeah, and Addie and I both lost a parent within, I guess, the recent years, and so that's, I think, another thing that we have in common, why we're maybe on this, I guess, path of learning together. Um, when you talk about the birthdays and the death days and the important days to remember, and you teach to even put it in your calendar, that was so touching to me, because it's like, let's not let that day go by, like you're not going to feel nothing. And so you might as well be conscious about what's going on, instead of, I wonder why I'm overly emotional today, or there's something in the waters, you know what I mean? But when I went through my, I did go ahead and do the DNA testing and do some ancestry, like web stuff that they offer with,
Yeah.
anyway,
We can
I
talk
found,
about ancestry.com. It's kind of becomes the elephant in the room when you're talking about
right.
ancestry work, but I think it's a great tool, especially for woo-woo folks who want data, science, records,
Mhm.
and the stuff we can't track on paper.
Yeah, well, so I did that, and there were so many birthdays and death days in common that I have some very specific astrological elements to weave in. So I
And
think
you
that's
wouldn't know that if you weren't tracking.
no.
I just put this calendar together for my sister for Christmas this year. So I went and found all these photos from us, from our family over the past probably decade, and, arranged them on a little calendar. And then I decided to go ahead and find the ancestors' birthdays and put them in the calendar. And so my criteria for selection was, if you're at the Thanksgiving table now, you get on the the calendar. And if, you know, if we can name you and you're in the tree and you have a birthday and I know it, it's going on the calendar. And I couldn't believe how many synchronicities there were in terms of like my mom's birthday or even a death day and a birthday lining up. And again, if you don't take the time to even make note of that, it's going to slip by you. You might feel it, but I think when we name these types of things, just like when we take our tarot practice and maybe connect a court card to somebody in our family tree, it is just a way for us to put those ancestors in front of us. So almost we can, it's like, I want to see the world through God's eyes. I would love to even see my own life through the eyes of my ancestors to help get some perspective on exactly what's going on in my life right now. It's so easy to get caught in the weeds of, I've got 2 kids and we got to get them to school and they're teenagers and just the minutia of day to day. But man, we are living in our ancestors' wildest dreams, no
Right.
matter what our life looks like right now.
I know.
The fact that we have phones in our pockets that have Wikipedia. I mean,
Right.
and in fact, technology, I love talking about how technology can assist this spiritual journey. And I'll never forget when I was sitting with my elderly grandmother in probably 2014, hearing her tell me a story I had heard a million times about how our ancestors came here. And I just said, Gaga, why don't we look up this town that you remember was where your ancestor came from? Why don't we just Google it? And so on my phone, I get up Google Maps and I type it in, and she had called it Wisby, which is the old Swedish way to say what is now Visby. And so I showed her my phone. I said, Gaga, did you know that Visby's on an island? She was like, I didn't know that. And that's the island that's now on my forearm. It's Gotland Island. It's in the middle of the Baltic Sea. And it's just, if she would have died without an ancestor like me there to capture that little detail of information, that was the key that I think the next 7 generations needed in order to be connected with the 7 generations that came before.
Right.
That
I mean,
one
that
word, that
one little
one,
thing,
yes.
you
And so
know?
when you were going to Galveston for your birthday, that was kind of some of the stuff that we talked about. I asked you, and this is the kind of work I do with my one-on-one coaching clients.
Mhm.
Tell me the details that you have. You don't have, it's not like you have to go and then become a detective and find things out that you don't already know. Start with what you
Right.
know. And you were able to tell me, well, we owned a store and he sold bananas.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
then I started asking you questions about, like, imagine what that was like for your ancestor to be providing an experience for people that they had never had before. He sold so many people their first bananas.
And do you remember this? I inappropriately texted Addie the whole trip because I was like, and then this thing happened. But do you remember the part where I'm just on the ship down there that's the banana ship, that it was the only banana ship in all of, it's the third tallest ship in the world, but it still sails. It's 144 years old. It happens to be in Galveston. And without this previous conversation that I was so bummed about because it wasn't on my birthday, without that previous conversation, I wouldn't have had that in my mind to even start up a conversation with the shopkeeper, who then relayed all of that information. And I'm literally standing on the boat, the only possible boat, according to this historian, that would have brought bananas over and been part of this influence, of how the general stores in our family got started. So it started with a banana for a penny, and it grew to 5 general stores across central Texas. So
That's
those are
amazing.
the little things that
And it's
come up in your
yeah.
readings that
Well, and the experience. So, I love, it is my dream that, I'm sure like with you, that everybody could just catch this fire, right? But it is my dream
Mhm.
for everyone to be able to stand in a place like that, even if it's in their own home, but to feel that reverence and that warmth and that knowing of my ancestors have either been here before in this physical place or they have experienced this before. And
Mhm.
so, losing a parent is something that, I mean, parents are supposed to go before their children, right? As humans, we are supposed to go through the experience of losing our parents or losing a friend or even losing a pet, so many unexpected things that happen in our lives. And then that is a tether then for me emotionally and spiritually to every ancestor I've ever had who lost a parent. And so I was able to think, it was almost like the cards, like the dominoes, just, I don't want to say fell because that sort of makes it, well, maybe I surrendered to this like karmic ancestral connection in that moment where I just thought, this is something that now connects me with all of these people. And it's something we never would wish for and look forward to, but I am going to make the most of this wild edge of sorrow. So this is a book I always try to tell everybody about, because when you start to do ancestry work, you're going to start doing grief work.
Mm.
It can be very difficult. This is a book by Francis Weller called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he was the first person who sort of said, the water's warm and it's wild and it's crazy out here and it's unexpected. And sometimes you cry and it's an ugly cry. And sometimes you laugh at a funeral. And sometimes it's your sister's birthday that makes you weep the hardest about your father's passing, which was my experience.
Yes, I know.
Not even his birthday or his death day. It was my sister's birthday.
Right.
But that's going to happen. And there's so many gems and jewels and gold that you can weave in those moments of sadness and in those tender, vulnerable moments of connection. The last thing I will tell you about I sometimes I try to find the line between telling my family story so much and encouraging people to, find ways to make it more universal. But my particular ancestor, the one who I've tattooed the tattoo on my arm for, she came to America with a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old on a boat all by herself. She was kind of a single parent because her husband had left 10 years before her and then finally sent for her 10 years after he had been in America.
Yes.
But when I was a single parent, I am still a single mom. When I had this realization that she too had been a single parent in an era when it was much less common to be a single parent. And the courage that it would take to get on a boat with 2 kids to take them to a new land, to a father that they didn't even know. I mean, she was pregnant with one of them when he left and the other one was only 2 years old. Neither of them knew their dad. And they were moving from an island to the middle of the country. And we don't think they ever saw the open ocean again. And so feeling that type of like guttural, deep pain, that's what I actually am working on. This is part of the worksheets that I want to share with Wise Guys members is 100 questions to ask your ancestors.
That's so good.
And so in the workshop, I present some of them and you'll get this worksheet to go with it that has even more, but it's these questions of, what was their deepest longing? And what was the thing that they desired the most? And when did they first have a banana? How did they respond to new flavors? What did they like to eat? How did they like to pass time with their friends? Because I think that when we start thinking about that, our ancestors stop becoming these flat, just names and birth dates. They become humans that are fully flawed and fully, they're in their humanity, right? They just like you and I, we are not the sun. We are not defined by our worst day. And we are also not defined by our best day. But to be able to put myself in their shoes for a minute, it helps me have a little bit more forgiveness when I think about some of the like dysfunction that might have been passed down from them. Or, one of my ancestors who finished a quilt. So if you take the workshop, you'll get to hear all about the quilt that I finished over the holidays. She, bless her heart, her husband walked out on that family after the kids had graduated from high school. And this was like 1947. And I had heard this story before, but it was just, in the back. All of the pain had been so encapsulated in that moment because nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
And only now, 70 years later, me and my sister are able to start talking about like, what might that have been like for my grandmother? What might that have been like for our great grandmother? The shame that would come, I don't even know if she got a proper divorce. He just left.
Yeah.
And he actually had 2 more kids and another family. And that's a totally unknown part of our family tree that I want to explore sometime. But that's the kind of exploration that you do. I think you need support and you need a safety net of people to work through it with. It can sometimes be too much. And I think that's why people don't do this work, is because it's sort of like in Encanto. Have you seen that new Disney movie?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So Encanto is very much about this kind of work. So shout out if you have heard that movie. or if you've seen that movie, you're going to start to see some themes here. One of the main characters, Bruno, he sort of sequestered himself away from the family because what he brought up was too painful for the family to handle. And only when the granddaughter starts trying to find her purpose does she realize that maybe her purpose is to sit with Bruno and hear what he had to say and be with him even in his, I mean, he's really the shadow character in the film. How do we sit with that shadow side? How do we sit with the parts of the family tree that feel broken or feel, it's like, we had the freeze here and the trees are really screwed up, and we're not all of the trees have survived. So last summer you'd have parts of the tree that were really flush with leaves and other parts that were just barren. And our own family trees are like that.
So I took 2 notes from watching that are so poignant to what you're saying now about your workshop. You said, that they had a falling out in the 50s that we still felt in the 90s. Dang, like true.
That was when my grandma and her brother stopped talking because of some marital conflict.
Right. But you're not wrong. You know what I mean? Like it still echoes down. And so I don't want to be like all privileged about it, but like this is our work and opportunity. And another note I took from something you said was, how do you get to handle your part of the family tree that didn't get to grow? Like the whole workshop, I'm just crying because there are many, it's not just us who lost parents relatively early. It's, people have great losses, and part of my work at Wise Skies is to offer mediumship services. And so I have several clients who have had major losses, and I know that speaks to them too, where it feels like something is interrupted and you're in kind of this grief sequence. And for me, part of the ancestral healing tarot, what that did was to stop that grief sequence and to kind of turn it into like a beautiful path forward.
Well, grief and growth are just inextricably linked for me. And so when I feel those parts of myself or my family tree, or even our society that feels so dead and dying and, glitchy, I can turn to my cards and say, cards, what healing medicine can I bring toward this uncle that I never liked, or this sibling who passed away, or this, fracture in the tree that I think might still be leading to some problems today.
Yeah.
Or how do I handle this situation that I'm not really sure about? Those are the kinds of questions that I turn to my tarot for. I don't turn to my tarot for, should I get married, or when am I going to find the job of my dreams, or the husband of my dreams, or should I buy this house?
Right. Yeah. It's a weird time because tarot is all of a sudden popular. It wasn't always when we were growing up. It was kind of more taboo or forbidden, and now it's like you're saying, like it can just be kind of kitschy. And so some of you guys listening who haven't tried tarot or haven't experienced it because maybe there's a part of your belief system that's like, oh, it's bad, or or I don't want to know when I'm going to die. Or how often do you get that question? We don't know. We don't want to know. We don't want to be part of that karma, right? But what the tarot can offer is a reflection of what's going on for you, and to hear it given back to you is so powerful, and those moments of synchronicity and validation are the turning points. Those are the windows of opportunity. So
it does take so much courage to ask yourself, not when am I going to die, but how has death affected me? And what am I grieving right now that has nothing to do with loss of life?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff they call, tarot was a form of folk psychology for hundreds of years. And if we can look at it through that lens, it becomes so much more than a divination tool. And I have so much respect for people who use it in that way. But, my mom, who is a pretty religious person, who very much believes in JC and the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, she has gotten into tarot work, and there's a place for tarot in that, in her spiritual practice, which I think is a really neat thing.
Oh, sometimes she joins you when you're doing your lives.
Yeah, she took a tarot class of mine last year. Yeah, I would love, I do hope to teach a tarot class this year. If you can follow me at Don't Fear the Death Card to find out more information about that. Codependency is another thing that really pops up a lot in my cards. In fact, that's how I read the entire Cups suit. And codependency is something that is often the family illness. You know, I mentioned in my workshop that alcoholism had been the disease that, you know, you didn't want to, don't drink too much because you might become an alcoholic, and nobody said don't try to control too much, you might become a codependent.
I texted everybody that when I heard you say that. I was like, that is the wisest thing I have heard about the disease of alcoholism and the other side of it, which is codependency.
And nobody talks about that.
No. And
I don't think nobody, but it's so easy
common
to place the blame on, because when you look into a family tree, you're gonna come up against people who struggled.
Yeah, right.
When you do this work.
Right.
And it's going to be so easy to be so judgmental about them and to say, well, if this person hadn't been this abusive, fill in the blank, then this wouldn't have happened. And then this wouldn't have happened. And my life somehow would be magically better if this great grandparent hadn't been the asshole that they were. I don't know if we get to use words like that here, but I just
don't know either. I tried to, whatever, I'm good with it.
So, but when we can do this codependency work about, well, it's really anti-codependency work about seeing people as the whole hurting humans that they are, and that they were doing the best in the conditions that they had, and to be willing to offer that forgiveness so that you don't keep drinking the poison thinking that it's going to harm someone else. And especially when we're talking about people who are dead, to continue to harbor resentments against dead people is doubly harmful.
Right. Yeah. I really want your take on that, because
so that's what the cards can help us with, right? Like, I'm really feeling this resentment towards this. You know, I have an uncle that I've struggled with. We have very different politics. And for a couple of years there, we were not speaking because I just could not handle it. And I can use my cards to work on healing that relationship. He's still alive, but you know, you could do this with back people who, this is where it really becomes helpful. Like, this is a very white perspective. I'm a Swedish American immigrant. You know, my kids are white. Like, I just really want to acknowledge that not every person has access to the records and the family stories, and you know, there's so much privilege that's wrapped up in my own personal ancestral experience. But I will tell you that I don't think it's a coincidence that my work really kicked up in this area in 2016, when I was really trying to understand my own whiteness and understand white privilege and understand what I could do as a white person without hanging my head low and saying I'm not worthy. And you know, it's really, how can I look up and open my heart and be teachable, maybe in ways that my ancestors were not, to say, I want to be in this conversation, even if it's a little uncomfortable. And I want my kids and I to have conversations about power and privilege that I didn't have when I was a kid. You know, this is, but this is what we do generationally, is we're adding one layer onto the next. And if we don't examine what layer we're adding, we're just painting over the scar, and it's not ever going to heal. And so, you know, yes, I have immigration in my story. It is not the same as a more recent immigrant story. And so this has actually really increased my compassion and you know, attempt to empathize with people of all different backgrounds and races through doing this work about my own specific ancestral path. So don't discount the amount of social justice and racial justice healing that happens when, especially as white folks, we do this work. And I think even, you know, no matter what your background, even if, you know, like in the African-American community, there are not a ton of records. And so sometimes it can be really hard to get beyond just what your great grandparents are, you know, or your grandparents are.
In the Jewish community, right? Like a lot of our records were burned, right?
100%. And so part of this work is starting to documenting your life now, starting a record trail for the generations that come before, and using our imaginations. This is where the other really influential teacher in my life is Adrienne Maree Brown and her emergent strategy book. How do we imagine a different future for our future ancestors? and not be in magical thinking about the way things were back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, it can feel intimidating, but the right relationships, it can start small. Just by getting in right relationship with your pets or your current living relatives, or maybe it's the reverse, getting right relationship with maybe your most beloved ancestors is really easy. Then you can move on to the other ancestors that maybe you have more difficult relationships with.
There's a lot of times with my clients where people have crossed the finish line and there hasn't been like a healing ahead of time. Like they cross the finish line where there's still sadness or grief or things unsaid or things unspoken. Sometimes like you're talking about dogs, sometimes that will be the thing that gives them validation that they know that the reading is real, because there's this certain type and style of dog with a certain name there. And so I just echo everything you're saying. It almost doesn't even matter what modality you want to work with. All of the tools that we offer at Wise Skies, they're all self-reflective. So yes, there's an element of mysticism, of course, when we're pulling cards. I love the term folk psychology. I'm totally going to borrow that. But there's just so much richness and depth to your work, and it's only possible because you did the inner work first. And so I just want to acknowledge that too, because
I really appreciate that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is.
And then we don't know what we're doing when we started. That's the other thing that I want to encourage listeners to honor within themselves is that when you feel called, I think we know when we're called. We hear the bell and you can't unhear it. And that the calling to go to Sweden in 2015. So my sister and I ended up taking that trip together. We didn't have the money to go on that trip, but Gaga was dying and we wanted to go before she died. And that's the only time my sister and I have ever traveled together like that. And I think to this day, it will remain one of the highlights of my life. And I could not have imagined that 6 years later, that ancestral healing would become my vocation, where I am quite literally feeling so called to this work that it's just shows up in everything I do. It shows up in what I do with my free time, working on hobbies, reading books about ancestry and Swedish immigrants and how we heal the world through our imaginations. And then it's the big work and it's the little work and it just takes up every part of my day. And I love leaning into that. I feel like that's what makes each of us so special. This goes back to that Encanto movie. Each of us has a gift, and you, I think, do such a good job showcasing and sharing your gifts with the world and encouraging people who practice with you there's so much to go around. There's not a competition between who can read astrological charts better. It's like we're each we're making offerings to the world, and we have language for that our ancestors didn't. And that's one of the things that, like, the deepest, most profound parts of this is when I think back to the opportunities that my ancestors had to use their voice, to make choices about the relationships that they're in, to make choices about the types of relationships that they have with their kids. Think about the relationship you have with your kid, the relationship that I get to have with mine. There's so much honesty and vulnerability there. I don't have to perform and be something to them. So I'm not so concerned with what society thinks about me. If I ever need a dose of gratitude about what I have, I just have to think back to how few of those liberties my ancestors had, either back and back before I can name them, or even as recent as, the 1980s when my mom was she was a stay-at-home mom and then she became a teacher and did not have the mental health tools that she could have used at the time to handle that transition. And that tarot was not available to her. The new age movement had just, it was. And so anyway, that feels like the 7th generation. I keep going back to that 7th generation work because I don't want to forget it, that this is not just something to pass time. This isn't just something to make me feel better right now. This is quite literally the work that my ancestors will remember me for. And all of us have that capacity that is just housed in our curiosity and our compassion.
Okay, I have a question for you since you went there. what have you thought about your grandmother name? If you get to be a grandmother, what's your grandmother name?
Well, I might have to be Gaga because there has been a lineage of Gagas. It's so interesting because there were two Gagas, my Gaga and then her mom. They were both Gaga, but my mom wanted to be called Yaya,
Mm-hmm.
and so she's a Yaya. And but I might revert to the OG because like I kind of also feel like maybe you can tell me more of your insights in this. Old souls. I definitely have been here before. I certainly have felt like a grandmother in many ways. Back when we were running around in the Austin Food Blogger Alliance days and the early social media in Austin, people more than once called me the grandmother of the Austin food community.
As
And
like
I
a
was
20-year-old.
27 years old.
Yes. Right.
and, and it took me a while to really understand what they meant. And now it has become very clear.
And honorable.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
And
Okay.
that I was doing this work before I could even name it. Just it's like, what is the archetype of what a granny does, right? They sit and they hold space for people. They weave connections. They offer true unconditional love, not the codependent love perhaps of our mothers, but the unconditional love that happens when you have a generation removed. And they offer it freely, and they're not looking for your approval. And that's
your story too about the coming in the boat with the kids, right? I had a similar reflection about my great grandmother who came alone several years later. Your span was 10 years, I believe. I think mine was 4 or 5. But there was conflict in the stories that have been handed down. And, the message was that, he said that they were married and no, that they were not married. And she said that they were, because she would never travel as an unmarried woman. And that never made sense. And so it wasn't until I started the conversation with the shopkeeper down there where she was like, oh yeah, women that traveled alone were women of the night, and they were turned back. They sailed their asses on a wooden boat in an icy ocean from Russia to Texas and were turned the F around. And so she had the wherewithal to be like, of course we're married, when maybe perhaps it wasn't until later.
And because she was not going to be turned around.
No, and your story about like finding the island and the name, the name that she had. Wise Guys has a sister company called Spellbound Publishers, and it took me a while to like sense into the logo that I wanted, and I found this winged cat. Did I tell you this story already?
This is a great story. Yeah.
Okay, so the winged cat first, I mean, it came from nowhere, right? Nowhere. God, spirit came from somewhere. But I had the thought, developed the logo, and for some reason, like later, looked up winged cat because I don't have necessarily Egyptian ancestry that I'm aware of. Well, in Belarus, where our family's from, there is a community whose symbol is a flag of a winged cat. And so intuitively, you might be so connected to your ancestors, your lineage, and not even really like, had I not Googled that, I would never have known it. So there's all these little things in your life that we're connecting the cosmic dots with.
I mean, I started sewing as a teenager. My mom hated sewing. Her mom hated sewing. There was nobody was sewing around me, right? But I just was like, this is kind of crafty and cool. It was like the mid-90s. and I started like sewing like jean skirts out of jeans. It was like very fashionable. 10 years later, it got me on what not to wear. That's a different story.
I didn't know this part.
So anyway, but I really have now come to believe that my interest in sewing all those years ago, 20 years ago, came through me so that I could finish this quilt.
Man,
maybe not even just this one quilt, but that even the metaphors that come with the sewing and just the idea that, I mean, it has been so personally soothing and engaging for me. But, my ancestors needed somebody to finish this quilt. They needed somebody to look at it, not as an object that's meant to decay in a trunk and just get eaten by mothballs, but to be incorporated and given life. I think that they put that desire to sow in me a long time ago, so that then 20 years later, 25 years later, my path would eventually lead to this spiritual awakening that has been happening through this ancestral work. The last thing I will say, I don't know if we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
think like a journalist. So I was a journalist for a long time. I still do a lot of writing, and um, think of myself as a food journalist. That will really help you in this process. So Ancestry is a wonderful tool. Ancestry.com is a wonderful tool. If you have done a DNA test, that is a great way to start, but you also don't have to do the DNA test to do this kind of work. Get the free trial for like 2 weeks. Just do a whole bunch of work during those 2 weeks, and follow the path of the green leaves. So what Ancestry does is they have millions of records that are already scanned and digitized. And so if you just type in your ancestor's name, it'll say, is this your ancestor? And then you say yes, and it almost can build the tree with just a few clicks. But each time you go back, because they're always adding more records, you're always finding new things. And this includes photographs. So they have digitized yearbooks from 100, 120 years ago. And because AI technology has improved so much, it actually will scan the name. So literally I just typed in Esther Anderson and I was able to find photos of her that my family had never seen in that. And so even if you don't have paperwork, you don't have stories, you don't have some grandma on her deathbed saying, we came from fill in the blank, you can unearth that information thanks to the information that's available to us, either through our DNA or just through some good old Googling.
Okay, about that, do you can you download your family tree that they have in a way, like I can't figure out any way besides just handwriting it all out? Like, is there
That is a very good question. I have not tried to download it, but look at what my mom gave me for Christmas. I have not actually even taken this out of the tube yet, but it is a parchment family tree. Activity includes family tree parchment, branch stickers, leaf stickers, and guidebook. Does my mom have my number or what?
Right. She loves you.
She does. So you can, this is, you can find stuff like this where you can map it out. Another inspiration for this is Henry Louis Gates's Finding Your Roots. If you need a little inspiration for this kind of work, have you ever watched that show?
Mm-mm.
Oh, good Lord. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. He is a scholar, an African-American scholar who has this show on PBS called Finding Your Roots. And he takes celebrities or, kind of well-known people, and then he does all the ancestry work, taking the clues that they know, and then he presents to them their life in a book based on what his genealogists and archivists can find in the public record.
Oh God, that's amazing.
I can remember watching that show 10 years ago and thinking, this is another clue, a real strong clue. Mm-hmm. What would people pay for that? If that was a service that was available for people, that's not a service that I do. I know there are services that do that, but that gift of that book, of that story, is a priceless piece of information.
Speaking of, can we give you all of our quilts, our unfinished
Yes.
quilts?
In fact, I actually think that I'm going to try to do that as like a side business or something. It would be a great honor to be finishing unfinished quilt tops. Okay, so here's this little piece of parchment. Oh my gosh, look at how cute this is.
It's so great.
And then I think you just like manually draw on your siblings and your parents and their parents and their parents and their parents. But it's it would be really interesting, especially for people who are really visual learners to, I think the family tree is one way to look at it, but I think there are other ways that you can sketch out ancestors and relatives to help look at their connections. For instance, like you have a literal family tree, but I think creating your preferred chosen family tree, i.e. the aunties, and maybe your mom wasn't quite so mommy for you, and maybe there was somebody else who really holds that position for you, to go ahead and put them, like, to make a tree that you can visualize, so you can have a healthy, a family tree that is full of nothing but supportive people, and people who are there cheering you on, and every day of your life today saying, you can do it. I believe in you. I see this in you that you can't see in yourself.
That will you be on my chosen family tree, Addie?
Yes, of course. I would be honored to. And you could think about that. What do I feel like to you?
Sistery.
Yeah.
history to me, because I'm like you, you know what I mean? We're these like grannies in younger bodies, like you're talking about sewing. I'm over here crocheting, right? Like I'm a plant lady, obviously.
I almost feel this is where like the cousin thing gets really exciting. Like I feel like you and I have a like a kinship that almost feels like cousins, because it's not close enough that there are conflicts, or close enough
Right.
that there's a yin or a yang. It's almost like we have parallel things going on in our families, and that, you have your own mom and dad stuff going on, and I have my mom and dad stuff going on, but we can turn across the table and be like, oh my God, can you believe that mom and dad stuff that we've been dealing with? So mine's a little different than yours, but I'm learning so much from you. And so it's just like, if you think about that with your friend group, maintaining friendships in the modern era, especially when there's a pandemic, requires so much thought and intention to actually call people and give them your presence and your attention, and to maintain those relationships over such a long period of time. And so bringing that to life with your living relatives and your friends and the chosen ancestors is wonderful. But I really find that the ritual of Day of the Dead once a year is not enough for me to be in contact with my ancestors. And so for me, I'm in contact with my ancestors. I make reasons to reach out to them during my life, during my week, during a Wednesday afternoon. It's not just this once a year or around their birthday. I think of them, because if I only reach out to you on your birthday, what kind of that's I want to be in relationship, that positive generative relationship with people who are ready to receive it, not the brick walls and the holes, the buckets that have the hole in it. That's how I like to describe codependent relationships, is that it's like there's some kind of leak in the bucket, in the hose. You put something into it and you don't really get anything out of it. So whenever we're working with whole relationships, just to really make sure we're carving out time and tending them, just like a garden. You can't expect the garden to grow without the gardener's shadow, the gardener's footprints. So
Okay. So in closing, thank you so much for the gift of your time. I'm like obviously puffy faced and cry, like it's not allergies, guys. I'm just crying with Addie. But we talked about pulling a card for my mom, and so I'm hoping you're available for that.
Absolutely. This is a good way to sort of showcase how people can do this kind of work with their own tarot practice. I do 1-hour readings with people if they want to. I can do just a regular old tarot reading, and that's great. But be forewarned, before we get started, I'm going to say, please welcome your well and chosen ancestors into this space. And you might have questions about, well, what do you mean well and chosen ancestors? That's where the ancestor work really comes in. And so let's think about your mom. Let's think about, we'll do a quick little three cardy pull. What does she have for you today to look at, to think about? What is sort of hidden underneath that? What is like the real thing she wants you to look at? Sometimes they're hidden. And then what's the medicine of the moment? What piece of wisdom is she offering you to help you through whatever it is that you're going through, either the next couple of days, just the rest of today, this winter season,
eternity.
So think about, here's one way that I like to focus in this lens, is to actually think about your mom in winter. So right here it is, January. Did she like to drink tea? Was she the type of person to, leave up her holiday decorations until February? Be like thinking about them in a visceral sense, beyond just like, oh, here's this idea of this person. What did they smell like? What types of food did they like to eat? How did they take their oatmeal? How did they take their coffee? Are you thinking about that stuff?
Oh yeah. Like, do I tell you, or do I just think about
no, yeah. Tell me one quirky thing about how your mom, like how she tended to herself. Or took care of herself.
Yeah. Well, a positive thing I would say is, for the word you can use to describe my mom, is kind. She was the kindest person you could meet. She was very devout with her religion, much like your mom. And you're like, think about her drinking, and you go, her tea, and I'm like, her whiskey. So she really enjoyed having cocktails, and she enjoyed coffee in the morning. And one of our favorite things to do together was to go on walks at her place. We would find heart-shaped rocks, and we would sit on the porch and watch sunset together. So she has well, I think I'll stop there. That's enough.
My mom also gathers heart-shaped rocks.
Of course, my cousin.
Of course she does. Okay, so this is really interesting. The first card I pulled was a 7 of Swords.
Whoa.
And then hidden underneath that is a Page of Cups. So these two cards have such different energies, right? The 7 of Swords is depicted with usually a figure who's carrying some swords and walking away from some swords. And you get to either interpret it as like a battle has just ended, or they're maybe either licking their wounds, or they're choosing not to go into battle. And what I love about the 7 of Swords is that, you know, every conflict is a choice. And sometimes it's really imperative that we use our voice to stand up and say, this is what I need. This is what I want. This is not okay. And that it's not necessarily a bad thing, that there can be generative conflict, and that we can, and we can also stay focused on our path and not get distracted and think that something else is for you, or, oh, I should have done this, or I should have done that. Or, you know, I think that self negativity, that I'm not good enough kind of behavior, this is us literally walking away from that. At least that's how I would interpret that card. How are you reading the 7 of Swords?
Oh my God,
mom?
I'm like, I don't want to reveal all that means for me right now.
But it is deep for you though.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's the most piercing conversation that she and I had, is what that represents for me. And you know, the 7 of Swords to me represents something being taken away, and the stolen in a way. And the Page of Cups is a part of your innocence and your youth. And we definitely had a conversation where I didn't feel heard. And I feel like you couldn't have picked 2 better cards to represent that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so the medicine is a 2 of Swords, which is not the Empress loving, like, let me take you a star kind of energy. You know, it is a baller. I'm going to choose how I look at this situation, and I'm going to choose how I look at that particular conversation, and therefore how I look at her as a whole. And even, you know, when it was funny when we talked about the tea or the whiskey, like there can be a lot of pain in that. Especially, I don't know if she had a problem with drinking, but you know, being able to choose to see her as somebody who had a lot lacking, or as someone who had overcome a lot, like that we get to choose how we see our loved ones, including their ugly parts, their sticky parts, or the parts where we might have gotten hurt. What would you say with the 2 of Swords on that?
To me, I usually describe it as a decision that is tough to make. And so I think that she had a lot of decisions that were tough to make, as do I. And you know, I think as that relates to that Page of Cups and 7 of Swords, that loss of innocence in a way, it is hopeful in how you said it. You know, it does provide hope. My mom's design and human design, her motivation is need, and mine's hope. And so I am always hoping, you know, in that childlike innocence that's represented in those cards, and hers is it being need. She knows what people need. She came to me in a dream on Christmas, and I asked for it, which was unusual. For both things were unusual. I was like, please come help me. I'm having a tough time. And, you know, are you there, Mom? It's me, Tiff, you know, like one of those moments. And she came to my dream and laid down with me in my bed, and didn't fix anything, didn't defend anything, didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't offer any resources. She just sat with me in my dream, and it was so real. You know what I mean? And knowing that, you know, it's knowing that she could navigate that, or that we could navigate that together in dream world, facing that two of swords, that tough decision, that hard truth, that that's kind of, I guess, how I'm experiencing.
So sometimes I will pull little helper cards too. I'm sure you do, just for a little bit more information. And so I had gone ahead and revealed the second card, and then to hear you say everything you just said, I pulled the Hierophant, which everything you were just saying about that dream, about not fixing and just letting it be and holding that space, that there's so much power that comes from that, and also love, even though it, I always think about the contraction of the 5, it can be so difficult, but there's so much love in that boundary.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was really powerful for me to hear you give me your interpretation of these cards and how it relates to your mom. So,
and I think that's the value of getting each other's lenses and seeing it through different lenses. It's like we can all learn from each other through these readings. Absolutely. And that's really potent for me. And I just love my mom so much, and I have so much respect for her in terms of the Hierophant card, which also represents devotion and that spiritual faith that is important to me. And my faith looks a little different than hers does, but she has never given me grief for it. Yeah. And so to me, that's just kind of a reminder that when you have faith, you're in acceptance and you're out of that self-control or that like need to manage everything. You're in everything you do becomes an act of devotion. And it was like that for my mom. Everything she did was an act of devotion, and you could tell it because her reactions were not normal. They were very kind. You know what I mean?
Did you ever wish that she got pissed off and she never did?
Well, I think I tried to trigger a lot of that. I'm a Scorpio. I have 4 planets in Scorpio. I had a lot of, I don't know why I was that way to my mom, but I borrowed her car, right, when I was 14 and took it from Abilene to Austin. That's quite a long drive for an unlicensed child. So I did lots of things for many different reasons, but of course she had her moments, right? Like she's an Aries woman, which I feel like is a very difficult expression sometimes, but of course she had her moments. But she also taught me such great composure and such great kindness in responding to things that were difficult or not fair or ugly, and it wasn't in this like, well, we are Southern women and we have to act this way, so you better act this way. It was like a true thing that she went through to be able to respond in kindness. And her parents were here. We're 4th generation Austinites, and so you can look around the town and see a lot. We can go to the cemetery and look at some of my ancestors on her side of the family, and you can look at Barton Springs and see the pecan trees that my granddad planted, and you can see some things where it's like it still feels like I get some ahas by looking around. But that Hierophant card, to me, it does speak to the things that you're devoted to, the things that you're committed to, and the faith that requires. And sometimes that can be sticky business. And so in the past, sometimes it has, but going forward, it doesn't have to be. And I think that 2 of Swords is that choice that you're talking about. So, we had a death in the family yesterday, and I was curious if some layered messages were going to come through, and they have for me. And like I said, I don't want to spill all my guts on this podcast. Sure.
Yeah, no, I love it.
But I just want you guys listening to know that there's so much truth in this for me, and it's not just me, and it's not just Addie. It's the magic of the moment when you come together with a heart of inquiry, the seeker's heart, and that commitment to self-reflection and lineage reflection. And anyways, I'm just like so blown away by your work.
What a gift for all of humanity when we do this. And imagine if each of us are doing this individually, the healing that happens within our families, even if we're the only ones in our families who are doing it.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that gives me a lot of comfort. And there's a reason why, here it is 20 years after 9/11 and we're in a pandemic, like the self-soothing, this is like, there's sure we can use modern technology to do some of this work, but this is a very old way of feeling grounded during uncertain times. And that also feels like I am honoring the great lineage of my ancestors in doing what I can to not just survive, but thrive during a very difficult time.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to invite everybody to come join the membership. Again, it's at wiseskiescollective.com because we're recording this for February of 2022. And Addie gave the most special, thoughtful, like from the heart of a journalist. I mean, the story arc was beautiful. The whole thing just wove together perfectly. And not only is there some magic and woo, and she's doing a reading for herself in that very special class, which was very vulnerable and beautiful, but she also offers so many practical things that are kind of arts and craftsy that I'm always like, how did I not think of that? It's like, get cousin Addie to give you a little craft project. And
Yes.
it's really fun and healing. And
If I can make healing fun, I'm serving God's purpose for me in this planet. So
well, you have for me, so
good. I can't wait to work with you again. And I have loved getting readings from you. If you, like me, listeners, have always admired Tiffany's wisdom, book a session. Just do it yourself.
Well, thank you so much. So you guys, Addie Broyles, don'tfearthedeathcard.com. She also writes for the Feminist Kitchen. And is it broylesa.com?
Broyles A is my handle on Instagram and all the things. And so as a writer, I continue to publish weekly columns and stories through the feministkitchen.com, which is a Substack newsletter about ancestral healing, emergent strategy, grief, boundaries, all of that good work. So I have two brands. I do pretty much the same work in both. One of them has tarot and one of them is just pure writing. So
same. One of them is metaphysical, wise skies, and the other one is publishing, spellbound. So very kindred.
And with our Aries moms who collect hearts. I mean, seriously.
And we found each other. Right.
So good to chat, Tiffany. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Addie.